Hello again and welcome. I hope that you enjoyed my last video, but there are many dimensions to the Egyptian gods. In the last video I touched on the creation of the universe and the world. I did not look to the biggest part of Egyptian culture. They are more interested in the dead than the living. I guess they've figured out that you're dead longer than you're alive. And that dimension is the underworld and the journey that the soul takes. And the gods involved in the process of moving to the underworld is very complicated and very confusing. The problem lies in the sheer age of Egypt. It's a land that outlives gods. We had the Egyptian gods, and probably even previous to that we had the what I'll call African gods. Then the Christians moved in, the Muslims, and after the Muslims there'll be other gods as well. But for now, let's look at part 2, the Egyptian gods. In my previous video, I concentrated on the gods who created the universe, and you'll find them crossed out in this photograph. Now, I also said that I would talk later about the children of Geb and Nut. The underworld is so complicated one would almost think that the priests were trying to make it so to keep themselves in a job. In any case, their children are men, Isis, Osiris, Nepththys, Set, and Khepir. And these individuals' details are: there clearly can be no one to populate the underworld with the dead without there first being a large number of living. And that brings us to the first god, the god Men, who was the god of male fertility. He was always shown to have dark skin and to be well equipped, and bore the crowns of Lower and Upper Egypt, and on occasion he had the disc of Ra, also having a special relationship with the god Horus. No, not that type of relationship. Horus's father Osiris lost his penis in an unfortunate incident, and a brass fixture was put in place, and Men used his power to restore it to working condition. More about that later. It is also said that Egyptian women wishing to become pregnant would find a statue of Men and touch his penis so they could do so. The goddess Isis, whose very existence was challenged by Ra. It was Ra's wish that Geb and Nut bore no children, for he had heard a prophecy that he could be challenged. Fearing this prophecy, he put forward a proclamation that Nut could not give birth on any day of the year. Ra's year was compiled of 360 days. However, Nut and Khonsu, the god of the moon, conspired to create another 5 days using some of the moon's light, giving the year 365 days. And then she was able to give birth to her children, and their children were born in pairs. The goddess Isis and her husband Osiris were born together. She was worshipped right across the Mediterranean, with the story of her life being absolutely incredible. But before it can be told, more gods need to be introduced. As we make our way through the pyramid texts and analyse
the knowledge that the Egyptians held, you can see that they were aware that the Earth is slowing down. In fact, it's slowing down at the rate of 1.8 milliseconds per century. So since the creation of the Earth, it's quite likely that the 5 days could have been lost, in line with the story of Ra. It is also evident that gods who are destined to dwell on Earth come from the sky. Not trying to imply anything there, but anybody who's looking for anything extraterrestrial, that might be where it starts.
As we look towards the god Osiris, the gods start to become interesting. Everybody knows him as the god of the underworld, but his life did not start that way. He started off as the ruler of Egypt, and as ruler of Egypt, he gave his people incredible gifts. He is said to have taught the people agriculture, how to make and use tools, the law, before he became the lord of the underworld. But we have to speak of his brother before we can move on to the full story of Osiris. Set or Seth, depending upon where you went to school, was the younger brother of Osiris, but of a very different character. He was said to be the god of the desert and all things chaotic. And the picture of his birth is somewhat confused. It is said that the children of Nut were born in pairs. However, there is another story of Set that he tore himself away from his mother's womb, and his wife and sister Nepththys were barren, a somewhat old-fashioned way of saying they could not have children. However, Nepththys disguised herself as her sister Isis and slept with the god Osiris, with the resulting child being Anubis. Set was jealous of his brother, but this brings about a number of interesting points. Many scholars have said that the struggle between Seth and his brother Osiris had more to do with the struggle between the north and south of Egypt. And even today there's a big division between the north and south of Egypt, with Luxor being the point of division. Although it may sound somewhat unrelated, there is also people saying that the Sphinx is much older than it appears to be, owing to the erosion marks upon it. But the truth is, some 12,000 years ago, the Sahara desert was a green grassland. And as it dried out, would that not look like a battle between gods, with evil winning over good? And upon the death of Osiris, Set took the throne of Egypt, and it was said to be a horrific and chaotic time. I've spent quite a lot of time in the desert, and know that it can be a cruel and harsh place. That is the way of deserts. And one can harbour some understanding for Set's position. Being second best and inheriting a harsh place devoid of life, perhaps it's even possible that as a god he made it so, while looking upon his more successful brother, and with the insult of his own wife sleeping with his brother, and giving his brother a child of which he could not give his wife a child, or for whatever reason a child did not happen. So he took the decision that he was going to make some changes, and that involved one of the world's most famous murders. He got his brother's measurements. Some said that he did it while he was sleeping, and constructed a very fine box to the exact and precise measurements of his brother, and took it along to a dinner of the gods, and said, to anyone who can fit inside this box, I will give it to them. They were all impressed by the quality of the workmanship of the box, and as expected, when Osiris into the box, it fitted him perfectly, and Seth slammed the lid closed and hoisted the box into the Nile. One cannot not see the parallels between Moses and Osiris moving down the Nile in a box. Perhaps this is the origin of the story. And without question, Osiris's wife Isis was devastated by this.
So as you move around Egypt, you see an enormous number of caskets and boxes as you move around museums and things, and you cannot help but wonder what sort of a casket Osiris would have been laid in. When Osiris was thrown into the Nile River in a box, one wonders what actually killed him. Was the box airtight and he didn't get enough oxygen? Or was it not watertight and he drowned? Or for that matter, the journey seems to have taken years. Did he possibly simply starve to death? Anyway, the box, or the casket as some people call it, travelled for very possibly even years, until it reached the Kingdom of Byblos. Byblos today is in Lebanon, and it's in ruins, but you can still see remains in that of the ancient citadel and that existed there. Upon reaching the kingdom, the box got entangled in a tamarisk tree, and the tree sort of fully grew around it. This is not an unusual thing. There's quite a number of cars and one thing and another that you see laying around that have been overgrown by trees. Osiris, being the god of agriculture, must have been particularly good fertilizer because the tree grew to an extraordinary height. And the king of Byblos took the tree to form a column out of it and put in his royal palace. Now, Osiris's wife, Isis, must have made up with his sister, and they searched together for Osiris's body.
Hathor and Isis took on their winged form.
And eventually she came to learn where the body was at rest, and she sought about recovering it. But she had to be very careful about this because she didn't want
Seth to know
that she'd found the body, or even that she knew where it was. He was happily in charge of the world and raining down as much chaos as he possibly could. So, by means of doing something for the king's son's health, the king agreed to give her the column.
It is hard to imagine the emotions involved. Isis got the body of her husband and was hiding it in a safe place, but somehow, some way, Seth found out where the body was, and he was aware of Isis's plans to resurrect her lost husband. So he decided that he was going to put forward a more permanent solution, cutting Osiris up into small pieces, 14 in fact, and scattering them right across Egypt. There are many stories around what ate Osiris's penis, from stingrays to fish, but today it's a crocodile. Unquestionably, Isis's love for her husband Osiris was very deep, and Isis and Nepththys, his search for the body parts was relentless. But slowly, one by one, with the exception of the penis. All the body parts were recovered. And the story goes that she did not assemble the body parts in one place. She used Anubis to mummify the body parts, and she planted them in different areas of Egypt, be it temples or tombs or one thing and another. And she even planted false parts in different places to confuse Seth if Seth was to come looking for them. In this time we think of mummification as being wrapped in bandages. However, in the early Egyptian period, they packed the body in clay so that the face could be seen. They switched to bandages in one of the later kingdoms. One thing I should have pointed out earlier is that the colour of Osiris changed from green to blue. Many have said, and I believe it to be true, that this was the rigor mortis of the body, and that was an artistic way of representing it. About now would probably be a good time to have a quick word about Anubis. As previously said, he was the bastard child of Osiris and Nepththys, and he was to become the god of mummification, with his first customer being his father. Despite his ferocious appearance, he has always been a favourite figure of mine. That said, the texts speak of him as being a kind and gentle god who guided lost souls through the underworld, but could become ferocious when protecting people's tombs. After a countless amount of time of heartache and hard work, the body of Osiris was assembled. There was a literal pantheon of gods assembled to oversee this, and this was a story so powerful as that Anubis was to become the god of mummification, and the Egyptian religion story of resurrection began in this way. The location of this, the spells and incantations used were never revealed, but I could imagine it would have happened something like this. After the resurrection was completed, the god Min was called upon to make the organ functional, and then Osiris and Isis spent the night together, with the resulting child being Horus. It is speculated somewhat that Min may have assisted beyond the point of getting the organ to function. Despite the tremendous efforts made, the restoration of Osiris's life was only temporary. The pull of the underworld was far too great. And in a sense, the fears of Ra were confirmed, but not in the way he expected, with Osiris being the king of the underworld and Ra being the king of the gods in the normal world. And Ra had to answer to Osiris every night on his nightly visit to the underworld.
To this point, I've entirely looked at the Egyptian perspective without looking at any of the controversies surrounding Osiris. And this is where the god gets particularly interesting. If we have a look at this hieroglyph, it represents Osiris in the Djed column form. Now, some have said that this takes on the appearances of a sarcophagus, and this was the very reason for a sarcophagus being used. Additionally, it is said to be the backbone of Osiris. However, when you travel to Dandara, a very well preserved temple dedicated to the god Khepir, you find some very, very interesting hieroglyphs. Now, with our 21st century eyes, we see something different to what possibly the Egyptians were trying to demonstrate. An example right here is a glass of wine or two people staring at each other, or alternatively a nice looking woman looking away from you, typical of me, and an ugly woman looking towards you. So this is the problem of interpretation. So let us now move on and look at the hieroglyphs.
Down a narrow corridor which is hard to film in because it is dark and narrow, and like the rest of Egypt requires a little graph to see, is the Dandara light. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I should tell everyone about the brilliant three-dimensional carvings. I'm cheating a little bit here. This is from another temple, but the light just shows them off brilliantly. But in the Dandara Temple, you can see that the three-dimensional carvings were once brilliantly coloured. And another unusual feature of the temple is that there is a layer of limestone sandwiched either side by a layer of sandstone. Reason being, I cannot say, but that is the way they did it. Additionally, I would like to add that at a future time I will do a full video on this temple. So in a chamber shrouded in stars above are many interesting and unexplainable hieroglyphs. In the crypt you find 3 examples of this most unusual artifact, a group of 2 and one that stands alone. There is rumoured to be another. Whether it is on this site or another site I do not know, but I have not seen it with my own eyes and it is somewhat damaged. So let's firstly look at this from an Egyptologist's perspective. We have 2 figures here that seem to have a double outline, and this has been done on purpose. It's not a mistake in the carving of the figures. We have a lotus flower supporting a glass tube, or what many people believe to be is a uterus. And beneath it we have one figure that appears to be praying. We have a representative of the god Shu. We have the Djed Pillar and another figure that is praying. In the Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo are examples of glass. Now I may be mistaken here, they may be Roman, but they may be Egyptian. Let us then compare a placenta, both as it would be seen after birth and as it is in the mother, to the tube that we are looking at. Another possibility is a good way to observe a cobra squirting venom is to put them in a glass vial. The appearance of a flower and what we see here is exactly correct. The Djed Pillar does look like the Djed Pillar, but also does look like a piece of electrical equipment, be that a high voltage insulator or a Tesla coil. These objects have been compared to many pieces of modern technology, like a valve or possibly even a catheter ray tube. They do give that appearance. As I said before, it does come down to interpretation and it can be interpreted wrong. I'll leave the viewer to judge what they actually see here. And below the image here we have an early Edison light bulb, and the coiled up snake doesn't look unlike the element in the light bulb. And that lotus flower looks very much to me like an electrical plug. And if this does turn out to be some sort of machine, maybe the people praying are hoping they've done everything correct and it doesn't blow up in their face. To add more weight to the mystery is the following hieroglyph, which doesn't seem to match up with anything. It appears to have a frog-like face brandishing 2 knives and a mechanical pin at the hip. It does in some strange way remind me of the copper statue in the Cairo Museum of King Khepir I, who died in 2283 BC. The Dandara Temple warrants a little bit more attention other than the god Osiris. Before we reach the Dandara light is this structure, and it too is amazing. Again, we are looking at something that could be a piece of electrical engineering. Down the bottom we can see a necklace, which is little disputed, and above we can see the heads of 4 cestrons. However, in between 2 of the cestrons is a boat type structure and something that looks like the disc of Ra. However, when you move in closer you can see wavy lines like waves. Then above their heads are 4 things that actually appear to be batteries. Now this is not without any precedent. They found a battery in Baghdad known as the Baghdad battery, which worked quite simply: wine in a glass with a copper tube and an iron rod. And ironically, the center of these colored images is the color of copper. But interestingly, there is a number of hieroglyphs speaking of a hand of gold. And then above these battery type structures could be wires, but they're not hooked up in either series or parallel. They seem to be doing something strange. And then there is a bulb type structure which would not stand freely. Now I don't know what we're looking at here. The goddess Hathor is sitting on a throne. Maybe she's being recharged or something. But another possibility is that she was the god of alcohol. Is this a description of a brewing process? Again, I will let the viewer decide what they can see, but this is certainly an interesting collection of hieroglyphs and sketches, and I will draw your attention to the bead type structures above the batteries, which look like high temperature insulators of all things.
No example of any sort of a machine, either for generating or controlling electricity or for brewing, has been found. And even the Baghdad battery has been lost. In 2003, upon the fall of Iraq, the museum in Iraq was raided and the Baghdad battery was stolen, and its location is yet unknown. And this is the problem with all Egyptology. I found the collection in the Louvre in France to be the equal of anything I saw in Egypt. And that is just one of many plunderings that has happened. And many of the things were destroyed on religious grounds, like the Muslims would have destroyed a brewery had they found it at one point in history. And it is clear from countless inscriptions that the Egyptians like their beer. And ironically, one of the latest theories on the Baghdad battery was used to take a gas out of beer electrically. So I'm not sure on any of this, but that is the facts as I have seen them.
Before we leave the topic, this is a statue located in the Egyptian Grand Museum, and to my 21st century eyes it really looks like 2 people at the controls at something or other. To the matter of Osiris on the Giza Plateau
is a very mysterious structure that has been dedicated to Osiris, although that is somewhat in dispute. And down this innocent looking doorway is an amazing tunnel structure said to be the burial site, or the symbolic burial site, of the god Osiris.
It's not the normal sort of place one visits when they go to Giza. It is incredibly expensive. It costs between $2,000 and $3,000 US to rent this space for 2 hours. So it is best to do it on a tour should you choose to do so. The complex itself is on 3 levels, with the first drop being a 6-meter level, followed by a short passageway, and then the second drop being some 18 meters deep, which once featured 6 sarcophagus. One of them, or I think more than one actually, has a tari-like structure on it, and there are bones in that scattered around the site. and the lowest level is partially filled with water, being some 30 meters deep, making it inaccessible, and it once contained 4 columns and a sarcophagus, which was a symbolic burial site for the god Osiris. Egyptologists tell us that the sarcophagus was empty. This site is supposed to be older than the pyramids and has been added to over time, with the lowest level said to be the newest level in the construction.
And those who seek the possibility that the gods were alien or somehow from outer space, we actually send probes and things great distances, like the Voyager probe has actually left the solar system now, and it is a machine. So if some alien race was to send something, it's very likely that they did send machines, and the dismemberment and the assembly of Osiris does resemble a mechanical process, along with many of the hieroglyphs dedicated to him in different ways, shapes and fashions. The truth I just don't know, but again, this is what you see when you travel to Egypt and start doing research on this type of thing.
To round up our pantheon of gods, we need to speak of the God Khepir, who is in the shape of a scarab beetle, and no figure is more commonly seen in Egyptian hieroglyphs than this one. It seems he became a god on account of the behaviour of the scarab beetle, rolling a ball of dung towards the sun, and then at night using the moon as a navigation means, and when there is no moon, using the Milky Way. So to understand his place in the universe, we need to somewhat change our model of the gods, with the earth as the Egyptians saw it in the centre, and the god Nut, but now Nut is upside down, and the morning sun is pushed up by the god Khepir, but his role is much more than this. This is a story of death and rebirth, and he is said to guide the souls of the dead to the underworld. And just like the sunrise being the beginning of the day, the scarab beetle appears in Egypt when the Nile is in flood and life is flourishing. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed that. I apologise for the birds, something seems to have stirred them up. It's a beautiful day here.
It's very important that if you did enjoy it, that you like and subscribe, and that way I'll be able to make more and better videos to entertain you. Anyway, as always, there's plenty more to come. I'd like to wish you all the best, and cheers and bye for now.